Tom Quee presents The Royle Ramble, an episode-by-episode celebration of the classic British sitcom The Royle Family. To get in touch with the show, email us at theroyleramblepod@gmail.com. Hey everyone, it's Tom here, back with another episode of The Royle Ramble. I hope you're well. Today we're tackling Nana Comes to Stay, which is the 4th episode of the 2nd series. And just before we dig into the analysis, of course we have a few bits of housekeeping to get through. The number one thing being, please tell a friend about this show. In any capacity. We're on iTunes or on Spotify or on YouTube. Please leave a review on iTunes, preferably 5-star. I've had quite a lot of reviews on there that have been fairly glowing, so go and check those out if you're curious. Patreon is there as well. I'll put the link down for the Patreon below, patreon.com/Royle Ramble Pod. And basically what that is premium access to the podcast. So you're currently listening to the 4th episode of Series 2, but the 5th episode will be on there and so on the Patreon. Also, all the quiz episodes, you may have noticed that we're doing the quiz episodes. I actually recorded a great episode with Paul at the weekend as we've just entered Series 2 of our line of questioning. So go there as well and check those out. What else is that? I think that's about it on our front, really. I mean, we're not like Twiggy. We've not got too much to hawk. But just prior to getting into the chat, of course, we have our emails. I love getting emails from listeners, and please do email into me, theroyleramblepod@gmail.com. Any thoughts you have on any of the episodes, any of my thoughts. Maybe you want to come on for the quiz or something like that, or you just want to natter about the show. Just let me know. And today we have 2 emails, and the first comes from Tom, from another podcast in the UK sitcom Brotherhood, that being his One Foot in the podcast about One Foot in the Grave. And he begins, "Hey Tom, a fellow Tom here, and thank you for giving the show a mention for the feedback you received from a close friend of mine who I met through podcasting. This was Simon. I understand you've never watched One Foot, but I urge you to perhaps give it a chance one day. What I would say is, I wouldn't recommend starting off at Series 1, purely because the picture and overall feel looks and seems dated. However, if you come to enjoy the series, you'll still love Series 1. It's one of those first impressions type things. Series 1 has many fantastic moments, and One Foot is full of dark, twisted and bizarre humour, with many sorrowful and sad moments. It has everything. You'll quickly come to love Victor Meldrew and one or two of the regular cast. Now, on the work of art that is The Royle Family. I was born in 1986, so by the time the first episode aired, I was 12 and remember the night it aired fondly. It's extremely rare that I managed to watch a new series as it aired. I often miss the boat on many series and watch them months, years later, or I just don't bother. But with The Royle Family, this was different. I was watching the episode in my room and was transfixed to what I was watching on my 14-inch portable. I loved everything about it. What was this uniquely produced television show with this scruffy, rough-around-the-edges family, watching the television with the sarcastic and moody dad? Where is the laughter track, which seemingly is not needed? I never thought I'd say that about a sitcom at the time this was aired, in that era of comedy. And there's that hot sort from the Fast Show too. When I finished Series 1, Episode 1, I rushed downstairs to find my mum had also watched it too. "Did you watch that programme just now, Series 1, I asked Mum with excitement. We looked forward to Mondays from there on out. At the time of watching the show, I'd enjoyed other shows such as One Foot, The Thin Blue Line, Red Dwarf, Keeping Mum, Dinner Ladies, Men Behaving Badly, Bottom, and many others in the 1990s. But Royle Family was uniquely different. Not just with the lack of a laughter track, but the one-shot film, the camera panning and the natural delivery of lines by the cast. It really was like a reality show at the time, and I'm so glad you're rambling away about this wonderful sitcom. What I will say about Royle Family that is not too dissimilar to what others say is, yes, that unique and special element of the show vanished from Queen of Sheba onwards. The Christmas tradition of watching the later Xmas specials was still a joy, of course. It felt only right to whack on a repeat of a Royle Family Christmas special, no matter what my thoughts are to it. By the way, how disappointing was Dave's dad? Didn't find him funny, and he was far too energetic and joyful, which was not the picture that was painted in the previous years. And apart from Dave Best's bizarre transition from fairly switched on and humorous lad's lad to that of a complete imbecile Fruit Loop, the other obvious change was Ricky Tomlinson's more pantomime-like performance of Jim Royle. Jim used to have such a subtle way of being sarcastic and being a naughty old sod. However, Jim Royle in the later years would scream and shout in an obviously humorous and jovial manner. I didn't agree with how Anthony evolved from the apparent lazy arse and useless young man with no prospects and being unemployed throughout his teens to this more well-spoken, well-mannered 20-something businessman with plenty of cash on the hip. And whilst I agree that people grow up and better themselves, I just don't feel Anthony's successes were realistic or in line to the Royle family feel. He was an outcast as it was in those first 3 series, but even more so when he appeared on a part-time basis throughout the years. A more realistic bit of storytelling for me would have been that yes, he did find work, but more job hopping because he could either not hold down a job due to his lack of ability or distractions in his personal life, or he perhaps did find some form of income in a creative field, given his alleged musical talent and juggling skills. The 2 most consistent characters for me were Barb and Denise. And what happened to Mary in the last few episodes? Had the actress become unwell? I know she hadn't passed at the time of filming. What on earth happened to Joe's mute ways? He was a totally different character, but still a fun one to have. I'll finish off the email by outlining my favourite episodes and moments from the top of my head. Anthony breaking the news he's managing a band and Jim's reaction. That cruel laugh, but one so naturally delivered by Ricky. We're going to get into that in this episode. Anthony's birthday. Nana's disbelief at Emma being a veggie. She could have wafer thin ham, Barbara. I mean, that's an all-time quote, isn't it? And the wedding day with the lads in the kitchen with Nana. Anyway, cheers, Tom, for the podcast episodes. Looking forward to the day you record early doors episodes, if there's ever time. Cheers, Tom. And Tom, amazing email. Thank you for that email, sir. And yes, I guess we'll just start from the bottom. Early Doors is coming, so I basically have to do all 25 or so Royle family episodes. That includes all the specials as well. And then I'm as eager to get onto Early Doors as you all are to listen to it. And it's great where, you know, I like that I mentioned it early on, and so many emails bring up, you're doing Early Doors, right? You're going to do the Early Doors stuff because it deserves it. It's a masterpiece on par with the Royle family for me. And yeah, also Tom, Mary's a bit of a tragedy there, and they did change all the characters just far too much. They really kind of went away from where they originally docked, weren't they, in terms of narrative and tone. I'm not sure about Mary specifically, and I don't want to kind of speak for her, but I know she was getting on in years, if you will, and I don't know, I didn't really like the fact that her ashes were like a joke in the show. I know it's a show, and I know more offensive things have been said. I may have already mentioned this on the show before, but it still irks me. And finally, I guess I should check out One Foot in the Grave, shouldn't I? I don't know anything about it. I mean, the extent of my knowledge is just that he uses a dog as the phone, and then he died in the episode that was on the same night as Judith Keppel winning on Millionaire, which is a bit more scored in my brain than the passing of old Meldrew. So yeah, cheers for the fantastic email, Tom. And again, another shout out to One Foot in the Podcast. If you're interested in that show at all in any way, check it out. Okay, and our second and final email comes from Phil, and Phil has got in contact before. Great to hear from you, Phil. He begins, "Hey Tom, I've already got in touch with you, but once again won't do any harm, will it? Still loving the podcasts, and like Payday, getting to enjoy a new one every month is an absolute pleasure. I'm still being a tight git and using the free streaming platforms on account of me currently moving home and having to save every penny, but would love to subscribe at some point and avoid the wait for your next episode review." I mean, thanks, Phil. I appreciate that. And again, no listeners, I'm sure you don't, but don't feel obliged to support on the Patreon. But huge thanks to all those who do. And that does remind me, actually, we did get a new patron this month. So massive thanks to Rebecca Grimshaw. Massive thanks to Rebecca Grimshaw for supporting the show. It's really, really appreciated. Anyway, back to Phil's email. Phil says, "I remember the first time I watched the show. It was back in 2000, and the first episode I saw was Series 2, Episode 6, Anthony's Birthday. This was in the days of VHS, and I recorded it and watched it again and again after. Unpopular opinion, perhaps, but I did find the show to be an acquired taste." I mean, I don't think that's an unpopular opinion, to be honest with you. I mean, The Royle Family is obviously a legendary show. It's etched into UK comedy history, in my opinion, but you know, I have a lot of friends that have very similar senses of humour to me. We love all the same shows. We love Brasseye, we love Simpsons, we love 30 Rock. You know, we're on the same wavelength with so many things. But none of them like the Royle Family. Like, even my girlfriend, like, you know, I showed her Barbara's Had Enough, and she kind of, I don't know, I think she's a bit bemused by it. I think you have to kind of get acclimatised to it, maybe, or it's like Marmite, I suppose. Anyway, Phil says, "However, it wasn't long at all until it was growing on me, as I soon bought Series 1, also on VHS, and couldn't wait for Series 3 to air later that year. It's tough to choose a favourite episode, but if I had to, it would be Elsie's funeral, with some of Jim's best non-verbal reactions to Norma's waffling, as well as, of course, his usual witty responses. It's amazing that Jim crosses the line with his living bloody dead comment, but just minutes later is able to get them all, including Norma, bursting into laughter over his antics on the baby monitor. I mean, yeah, that is the GOAT ending of Royle Family episode for me. That is unbelievable. Anyway, look forward to hearing your in-depth analysis on the rest of the episodes. Off for a medicinal drink at the local now. Ta-ra, Phil." And thank you, Phil, and thank you, Tom, for your incredible correspondences. And if you want to get in touch with the show, message me, theRoyleRamblePod@gmail.com. But anyway, that's enough of that. Let's talk about the episode. Alright then, let's get into it. And as ever with the show, and much in the style of another one of my all-time heroes, Alan Moore, and yes, I am putting Craig Cash and Carolyn Aherne in that pantheon, the Royle family loves ironic juxtaposition. Think of the jaunty music of Wish You Were Here that opened Series 2, accompanying the slightly muggy interior of the royal homestead. And here, at the start of the 4th episode of the 2nd season, we have a presenter from Tomorrow's World stating, "Hello and welcome to the future." That is, as we fade into something very much clearly emerged from the bog of the past. It's Norma! Norma's in the episode. Well, Norma's lap at this point as we start. And let's take a moment to examine Norma a little more closely, as it were. We can see, for example, her wedding ring clearly for the first time. One I imagine she hasn't taken off since the wedding to the freehand tool grinder that was Mr. Speakman. The person she said she was unhappily married to for decades, but still kept it going. Just like old Betty kept it going, who we heard of last time Nana was on screen. Old Betty. And a description of her here that opens the script is excellent. It states, quote, "Nana is asleep on the sofa, a patch over one eye. Dave sits next to her, watching the telly. Jim is in his chair." And in a great Nana touch, we can see that she's sleeping with a handbag on her lap. Her ever-trusty handbag that Denise was sure to remind her to take when she was departing from the sofa to the dinner table in her last appearance during Sunday lunch. They are speaking on screen in Tomorrow's World about some baby Cody, and as we pan up, we see Norma herself not exactly sleeping like a baby. In fact, she actually scoffs and mouth snores. Does that half smile we do when we're asleep to clear the side of your mouth, the running back of the typewriter gums, if you will. And Norma's acting, Liz Smith's acting, I should say, is spot on here physically. I don't really act myself, as I've said before, and I imagine it's really hard to appear like you're sleeping convincingly. Similar to how it's difficult to appear like you're drunk convincingly. Something we saw that Carolyn Aherne and Craig Cash were so adept at during Another Woman. And just to reiterate an old point, this is one of my favourite subtle things about this whole Nana coming to stay saga. 2 episodes mention her in their titles, but she's only in 50% of those. And the one she's in, she's actually asleep for 90% of the episode that she stars in. But, of course, she makes her presence known in many other ways, as we've seen here already. And Nana's blouse, too, is top tier, I must say. The fashion choices remarkable in their precision as ever. The camera then cuts abruptly from Norma's front to Jim, rather than turning as it normally would. He's sitting slightly ungainly in his throne. It's a bit of a surprise to see him in his chair here to open things. His legs slunk over one arm, his crotch pronounced. And as talk of Craig Doyle taking a trip to the rainforest in the TV airs out, Jim rises himself up off the chair, squeezes tightly with effort, farts indulgently and unencumbered, seeming to recognise himself through his esteemed nostrils that this was a particularly bad one. And he doesn't even pause, Jim, before going to pull the paper out of his chair and beginning to fan forcefully towards the slumbering Norma. The camera this time now moving slowly between them both to reinforce the proximity. And I love how we get to see here, as it turns, that Dave is there too, idly watching Tomorrow's World as he laughs conspiratorially, clearly not even minding that he is downwind of something dead ripe. And this is such a sign of disrespect, such an offence. I mean, obviously hilarious and schoolyard. Very Jim too, using his superpower of sorts, if you will. And I do like that they show this, as it both informs you of the level of warfare endured between the two for it to get to such a transgression, or maybe not, maybe this is something that Jim's always done. But it also shows you that Norma actually is asleep at this point, because throughout the episode, and Jim points to it too, like, is she actually asleep? Is she just resting? Is she just there to kind of be the focus of attention even when she's not awake? But come on, she must be in a deep sleep here too, as I imagine the mustard gas that Jim is presenting, the intensity of that would rouse even a coma patient. She can't be playing, is what I'm saying. Lots of it is for attention and wanting to be cared for, but this, at least, is sincere. And poor Norma, poor one-eyed Norma, poor farted upon Norma. The shot lingers for a second with Dave smiling, and then cuts to behind the three of them. And I love how when they do that, Jim is still seen to be fanning. I mean, it's overkill at this point. Arguably just being in the blast radius, Norma would have felt it. But Jim needs to hammer it home, as it were. Get molecular, I suppose. And just as the show on the TV is about to tell us about an invention from New Zealand for around the world, we cut to the kitchen with Denise and Barbara. But just before we do, Tomorrow's World. I mean, I kind of remember this being on TV, but, it's a landmark show and a reference point for so many great clips where, they get it so wrong. But in that way, it becomes a bit of a retro-futurist thing that I appreciate as well. So Tomorrow's World was a British TV series about contemporary developments in science and technology. It first transmitted in July 1965 on BBC One, and it ran for 38 years until it was cancelled at the beginning of 2003. The Tomorrow's World title was revived in 2017 as an umbrella brand for BBC science programming. And in many cases, the show offered the British public its first chance to see key technologies that subsequently became commonplace, notably synthesizers, the digital watch, mobile phones, camcorders, and of course stuff that didn't stick, like a fold-up car that could be fitted into a suitcase. So from this, we clatter to the kitchen. And I love hearing in this episode that they split the action up somewhat, move to different spots. Similar to what we saw in Another Woman or the first Sunday afternoon episode with the wedding dress on the coffee table, as it went back from the kitchen to the lounge. The lilting back and forth, the parallels being drawn. And here we can see both Barb and Denise in their natural habitats here. Denise on her arse at the table, leafing absently for a catalogue like we saw in the pilot do. Though this time there is an untroubled racing supplement also on the table. And Barb, well, of course, she's cleaning. And again, instantly we're given a stark reminder that motherhood is not something Denise is enjoying or even wants to revel in, despite all the perks it has gifted her. There's no point in buying maternity, she says, as she's not having another one, no way. I mean, that's not something a prospective grandparent probably wants to hear, what with the spigot of grandchildren just being opened and now seemingly closed off again by Denise. And Denise also won't be buying maternity clothes, she says, as she won't be able to get more use out of them. I mean, it's not like she's a frugal person, it's not like they help the pregnancy, do they, Denise, in any way, help her relax better even, help her sloth deepen, but yeah, she's just not interested.
It's not worth buying maternity ones. I mean, I'm not going to have another, no way.
Barb then asks about how Denise and Dave are going. I mean, she's always asking this, which is quite sweet. She's, she can remember that they've argued a lot back in the past, and they probably still continue to do, so she's got to keep an eye on it. And Denise then takes a little pause, says that Dave doesn't really realise how hard it is for her to carry another person around. I mean, to look at Denise at this point, okay, she's sitting down, we rarely see her standing up. It's not even clear that she's pregnant at this point. And, it's also richly ironic for her to say that too, as of course, Dave is the person carrying her around, rather than the other way around, carrying his own baby around. Then Denise smiles to herself, talks of her baby book, which is sweet, shows maybe she cares somewhat behind the fact that it can get her wagon wheels. And, she relays the fact that the baby is the size of an orange now. It's so funny that we have this progress charted throughout. And Barbara smiles to herself as she hears that and is drying the plates. The info seems to elevate her somewhat. And as one future grandmother is thinking about her future grandchild, one grandchild, Denise, is showing a little empathy towards her own grandmother.
Oh, Mum. I feel dead sad when I see Nana with that patch on her eye.
She was looking in there for baby things for you.
Oh, was she? Just one eye?
Yeah. She said they were too dear, though. The thought was there.
Dead sad. Again, the way they write Denise's voice is perfect. And yeah, I know, dead sad. It's not exactly bloody Philip Ridley or David Mamet, but the tone is terrific. And yet again, as I've mentioned a ton, this is a show that loves details, that minds comedy from the minutiae. So for Denise to confirm that it was Nana with just the one eye, as if that makes any difference. I mean, seriously, if you're listening to this right now, cover your eye, unless you're driving, and see how much harder it is to read, to live. It isn't. And yeah, like Jim, yes, Nana and Jim are so similar. Check the old episode, we've gone through that. Like Jim, Nana's a miser, she's not actually going to spend money on these things. But the fact she's looking is kind of sweet. The thought was there, as Barb says, and sometimes that is all that matters. But, likely she was killing time, Nana. Kilroy had ended, and it was before Ricky Lake, I imagine, or one of her naps. We learn then that Nana wants to stay more than a week, just as Jim predicted, really, and who can blame her? A Sunday flying visit is just that, but getting entrenched into the rhythms of the house, always having someone nearby, maybe Mary pops round, that's not present down at the flats with Elsie, and it's easy to see why it would be desirable for Norma. And following this, Barb then relays a dispatch from the war zone that must have been the last few days.
Should have seen your dad before. Your Nana went upstairs with the remote control by mistake in her handbag.
Oh, no. Poor Nana.
And last night she made him take out all the plugs, you know. Said she couldn't sleep with them all in. He had to reset the video this morning and the air was blue.
Denise's oh no there. Carolyn Ahern's delivery, her stooped body language is perfect. And it's such a Nan thing to do too, isn't it? To pop the remote in a handbag, that ever-trusty handbag. Denise knows instantly how this would have played out. And it's good to see Barb laughing in recognition. I mean, they've no doubt gone through all this stuff many times before. Now, remote in the handbag is one thing, okay, thoughtlessness, absent-minded, etc. But the transgression following that is far too far. Making Jim turn off all the plugs in the household. Really? I mean, again, classic geriatric worrying, but I've got a feeling Nana wouldn't have done that in her own place in the flats. I mean, she's far too lazy. And it's mad effort too. It really is asking a lot. Kind of makes me wish we could have seen this play out as part of an episode, as if nothing else, it'd be a good excuse to get a guided tour of sorts of the royal homestead. I mean, perhaps Nana did this on purpose. There's many things in this show, minor victories, you know, that people revel in. And that could be like Nana getting her revenge on Jim to a certain extent. And she knows that if she asks this, that Barbara's going to get very, very pissed off. Jim's going to be put in Barbara's bad books, as he says, coming up, you know. There's a lot of scenarios playing out. And turning off all the plugs too, of course, has consequences. And Jim, we learned, then had to reset the video the next morning. The video that Nana was mostly using for Montel, Ricky Lake and the like that we discussed earlier. Barb then states that she wishes Nana's ears were covered up rather than her eyes as the air turned blue. And again, another scene I wish we had the privilege of seeing. Jim effing and jeffing as Norma shakes her head, clutching no doubt at a handbag. And, like offering to cook Sunday dinner for the gang last episode, for it only to be that she'll have Barbara over to cook somewhere new, Denise comes with another empty gesture, stating that she could have taken Nana out for the afternoon, but of course she's pregnant. I mean, pregnant with a citrus fruit, in fact, but regardless, you know, she still needs her afternoon naps. One she undoubtedly had before the pregnancy and will soon have after, probably alongside baby David, perhaps even out napping him. Then we cut right back to the men who are also talking about Nana. We learn that Cyclops had it in her bloody handbag. I love that. I love that we have the prior story being told and then Jim just finishing it in synchronicity. And Cyclops, of course, in Greek mythology and later Roman mythology, the Cyclopes, or singular Cyclops, are giant one-eyed creatures. 3 groups of Cyclopses can be distinguished. In Hesiod's Theogony, the Cyclops are 3 brothers, Brontes, Stereops, and Argos, who made for Zeus his weapon, the thunderbolt. In Homer's Odyssey, they are an uncivilized group of shepherds, the brethren of Polyphemus, encountered by Odysseus. And Polyphemus, if I remember my Odyssey history, I think he's the son of Poseidon. And then the third type are also famous as builders of the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae and Tiryns. I've probably butchered all that, but probably not many classical scholars listening. Or maybe they are. You know, there's a lot of royal family fans among us. There are dozens of us. Jim then continues to critique Nana, whilst also critiquing himself in a way. She's had the same bloody handkerchief up her sleeve for 4 days. I mean, how long has Jim been wearing that shirt, to be fair? And the way he delivers this as well, with the angry whisper, is fantastic. You know, I'm pretty sure, though, we've seen Jim with this shirt in at least 4 episodes, and I doubt it's been washed between those times. He calls her a mongrel, states that all she does is eat, shit, and sleep. I mean, who does that sound like? Jim also ponders, speaking of myth, Jim also ponders what's in her mythic handbag.
She's had the same bloody handkerchief up her sleeve for 4 days. I tell you what, I'd love to have a look in that handbag.
And what's that noise that he makes? What is he saying there? What does he imagine in there as well, apart from remotes and handkerchiefs and revels? But we'll get to the revels. And there's a great shot here as they're chatting that cuts to Nana, stirring. They're whispering somewhat, but she seems dead to the world, even with people talking over her, even with the lights on in the lounge, even with the TV blaring. Jim is hopeful, though. She'll be gone in a few days, he says. Her and the eye patch that he clearly thinks is for show. Dave mentions there's the other eye patch too, and Jim rues the thought. Then he asks Dave if he fancies a pint, using him as a possible conduit as he's currently in Barbara's bad books. Love the inflection, how he says that. And Dave counters that Denise won't like that, and Jim says it's no problem for him to sort her out, as if he's some suave people person and not a grumpy old man in the corner with precisely zilch tact. And then, as if to underscore Jim's need for escape, Norma pops up on cue. So exaggerated. Like, I'm certain no one ever makes those sort of noises she makes here, unless they're play sleeping for comedic effect.
There's no sweeter sound, is there? To strangle you out.
Then, in a first for the show, Jim actually threatens Norma with physical violence. You know, he's clearly at the end of his very short tether. Again, his delivery here, the mealy-mouthed abjection, the guttural dismissal. We don't get a shot of Dave reacting as he threatens strangulation or agreeing even, which sharpens the approach. It's purely on Jim, thick with spite. And talking of potentially snuffing out Norma, we cut to Barb then back in the kitchen, snuffing out a cigarette in an overfilled ashtray on a tea tray. A large snatch of sugar beside it in a glass bowl, along with a cup painted with flowers and a pack of Silk Cut. Silk Cut, by the way, being a British brand of cigarettes currently owned and manufactured by the Gallagher Group, a division of Japan Tobacco. And Silk Cut is liked by a few fictional characters as well, including Alan Moore's John Constantine. Mentioned Alan Moore before. He first appeared in Swamp Thing and now went on to be his own DC Comics character. Shout out to Keanu Reeves. And Helen Fielding's Bridget Jones also loves Silk Cut, supposedly. So Anthony then comes in to the kitchen asking for a butty as he's starving, and Anthony currently rocking a new dyed look. I mean, classic for someone of that age to do that, and, you know, it seems to me, at least, to be reminiscent of the Stan video, but I don't think that was out at the time. You know, I mean, it's not original for guys to bleach blonde their hair, is it? So Barbara compromises with Anthony's offer and says that he can have a club biscuit. He counters back that Denise is always eating, to which she replies that she's eating for two. Barbara then says she's got enough to worry about you two starting. And starting is a great term, by the way. I mean, I have a younger brother, 18 months younger than me, and my parents would always, if we were getting aggy, to say stop starting. So then, as if Barbara's not got enough on her plate, someone else enters the kitchen who always has enough on her plate. Cheryl. And Cheryl enters like a proper vibe. Aura and all, as Jim would say. She seems cheerful, greets everyone, sits down, asks Denise how she is. Denise says she's not trying to overdo it, to which Anthony widens his eyes in disbelief. Anthony, who stays downstairs with the gaggle. I mean, I can't imagine he'd really want to hang out with Barbara, Cheryl and Denise, but neither Dave and Jim, with Norma comatose in between, is appetising as well. And I suppose it was different back then. You know, didn't really have a phone to hang out on or a computer. You just had to nurse a club and hang out in the kitchen. Barbara then urges Denise to tell Cheryl the big news, to which she at first doesn't even realise what she's going on about, because, yeah, it isn't exactly breaking. But the baby is now the size of an orange, she tells Cheryl, who responds in a charming way, saying that she's a godmother to that orange. I mean, that's probably the first bit of fruit she's ever been near. I mean, geez, sorry, I'm doing lots of Cheryl slandering tonight. I'm going to on one. Barbara asks Cheryl how she's doing at Weight Watchers, says she's doing well. And, you know, the timing here is so delicious. Barbara asks after if Cheryl wants a biscuit, and the speed and resoluteness to which she responds is terrific. It always makes me laugh.
Hey Cheryl, how are you getting on at Weight Watchers?
Brilliant, thanks. Yeah, I'm doing really well.
Oh, do you want a biscuit?
Yeah.
The biscuit isn't going to make too much of a dent, as with Weight Watchers you can cut stuff out, we hear. And Weight Watchers, well, WW International Inc., formerly Weight Watchers, is a global company headquartered in the US that offers weight loss and maintenance, fitness and mindset services such as the Weight Watchers Comprehensive Diet Program. Founded in 1963 by Queens, New York City homemaker Jean Niddick, WW's program has 3 options as of 2019. Online via its app or website, coaching online, or in-person meetings. In 2018, the company rebranded to WW to reflect its, quote, development from focusing on weight loss to overall health and wellness. As of July 2018, Weight Watchers was the most widely used commercial diet in the world. In addition to the US, as of 2018, it had operations in countries including Canada, the UK, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Sweden, Australia, New Zealand, and Brazil. And some therapists have said that focusing on counting calories or points, as promoted by WW, can lead to a disordered relationship with food and hunger. We learn after this then that Mary has bought Cheryl a blender. Blender! Something Denise straight away wants, despite not even knowing what they're used for. Cheryl then compares the 150 calories of the club she's eating to the 18 calories of blended healthy slop that she has to endure. Denise tries to do the maths, but can't really work it out. I love that Mary's bought Cheryl a blender as well. That's a kind gesture. And this whole scene, this is such a drawn-out scene, you know, in the best possible way, of course. That's how we like the scenes in the Royle Family. Really slow and languid, in the way that only this programme can do. Cheryl then just basically describes why she loves the club in detail. She states that she loves the chocolate on the club, and we can see her eating it in a very predatory way, like a cat with a mouse, toying with it, biting around all the sides to maximise the chocolatey taste.
I love the chocolate on a club.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And, I do the same with some foods, to be honest. Like, I eat an apple in a very specific way, I don't know why. And I will say that anyone that just eats a cheese string by biting into it without just pulling off the strands, they're a psycho in my book. And there's an interesting shot here. There's an interesting dialectic, if you will. So the shot, we can see Anthony in the back and Barbara listening up front. Barbara stoically watching and, just hearing Cheryl out as a mother does. With Anthony in the back just shaking his head dismissively at all of this. With some aggression as well. I always wondered why. I guess he's just a teenager. He finds this all boring. He sees futility in Cheryl's actions. It's all very drawn out to him as well. Cheryl, she cares. She asks after Nana's eye. We learn that apparently Nana could take the patch off now, but she's keeping it on just to spite Jim. And suddenly from here, we're back to the pilot in many ways. Denise and Cheryl looking through the catalogue together. Denise shows something to Sheza, and she then points out a lovely baby, and they all coo. Barbara laughing warmly and maternally, as behind her, someone who was once her little baby, Anthony, is clandestinely taking from the biscuit barrel. Denise reveals that they're getting a baby intercom after this, but only so they can tell the baby to shut up from a distance. And I wonder if they were thinking of next series and the scenarios they could do when they came up with this idea here, because obviously there is a whole intercom scene in probably the best episode of the third series, Elsie's funeral, where Cheryl's involved too. And it's a nice little touch too when Bob says they didn't need one when they were growing up, as they could hear them from all over the house, that we can see Aunt laugh lightly behind. It is weird to think, isn't it? Like, Denise and Aunt, they're so crystallised at this age in the show. I mean, of course they are. But, they would have been kids. They would have been, down amongst Jim and Bob's ankles at a time, And Cheryl, again, like the first episode, asks about Anthony's love life. He jokes if she's interested. And Barbara gets pretty defensive here, full naming him, Anthony Royle, which is a bit much. I mean, it's only a gag. She asks why he can't answer a civil question, which I guess is more of a riposte at Jim than Anthony. But, she needs to get it out some way. Ant, we learn, doesn't want to bring Em around, he says. Why do you think, he asks as well, rhetorically. Barbara says that they aren't the Addams family, but to be fair, Anthony does get called Lurch fairly often. And Cheryl's very curious today, asking if Nana found her watch, which was no doubt a saga she was privy to previous. It was in her handbag, obviously. And Barbara then relays a cute story about Nana being embarrassed about Jim seeing her knickers wrung out on the line, so a tea towel was used to cover them. Ant says they should have used a sheet the size of Nana's, which gets a deserved communal laugh. Barbara, though, is nervous to leave them alone all day tomorrow too, despairing at what might happen. It sounds like a real Cold War out there, with Jim pretending the video is broke so he doesn't have to take Ricky Lake, Nana keeping her eye patch on. Barb says that Jim has no time for the elderly, but I mean, who does he have time for? And Barb also ponders that Jim will be old someday too. I mean, he kind of is already, especially in his entrenched habits. And Ricky Lake, let's talk about Ricky Lake for a second. Ricky Pamela Lake is an American actress, television presenter and producer. She's known for her lead role as Tracy Turnblad in the 1988 film Hairspray. Now, I didn't know she was in the original Hairspray. I actually really like Hairspray. I'm just a musical fan in general, but I didn't know that she played Tracy. That's very, very cool. She kind of can definitely see that. And she's also known, of course, for her talk show, Ricky Lake, which was broadcast internationally from September 93 until May 2004. When the show debuted, Lake was 24 and was credited as being the youngest person to host a syndicated talk show at the time. Now, I do remember the Ricky Lake show having a bit of a presence over here, and according to the Wikipedia, the show was also popular in other countries, especially in the UK, where it aired on Channel 4 and was aired daily on ITV2 until 2009, as well as in Australia. And even though it's been out of production since 2004, the show is still screened in various places around the world, such as Nigeria and in the Middle East. Then we get some Joe data. Joe is heading into the hospital, Cheryl says. They don't know what it is, though, and, there's little info, it hasn't really said anything. Something Denise and Bob smile at together without dim Cheryl even noticing. For Cheryl, she's a little slow on the uptake, isn't she, in general? A facet of her personality that's emphasised when Anthony takes his leave.
Is Anthony down there?
Yeah.
Thought he had.
Anthony then heads into the lounge, greets Dave, settles into the armchair, eyes on the TV. Dave asks about the band. learns they've broken up already, reacts with faux shock and zero surprise. Bloody hell, he says. Before turning to Jim as a snigger blossoms on his face. Dave knowing that there's some hellfire coming. And Nana sleeps through this as well. Jim roaring, cackling in his seat. And, one of those long laughs that bubbles and gestates between bellowed breaths. Truly, Ricky Tomlinson sounds amazing here. I mean, this show is filled with great laughs, as we've touched on before. Look, think about Twiggy, for example. Nana has a nice laugh as well. Kind of irritating, but very theatrical. And Jim's here is up there. The camera moves from Ant and Dave across to Jim, who we just see in uproar. And then the camera moves back to a hollow-faced Anthony. Jim is laughing so hard, and Jim is laughing so hard that he actually begins to pound the armrest of his chair just as the camera turns back. The laughter continues, really for quite some time. Dave looks over at Ant smiling. Exit, exit, Jim says. Can't help himself. And again, laughs so hard, shaking his head. Great extreme close-up here of Jim too, a real artful shot we don't get a lot of. Not on profile, but side on. And Anthony's really bothered and upset, I guess. It's kind of hard to read his face here, but Ralph Little acts fantastically. And it's nice because in this quick shot of Ant reared up in his seat, staring at his dad, laughing hard at him, not with him, it's nice because we get to take in the new Anthony proper. We get to appreciate his dyed hair, his earring, his classic anonymous sports jumper throw whatever. And Jim is practically animalistic. He's growling at points here. He's laughing so hard, laughing at his son's failure, I must point out. And at this point, we cut back to the girls in the kitchen. Lots of scenes in this episode. Lots of, quick little things. It's great. Cheryl, with her club wrapper in front of her. Not only the sheath of that wrapper in perfect condition, but the biscuit wrapper itself, the foil, is now folded up in front of her too. We can also see that she's wearing a cross here, which is no doubt from Mary. I do wonder about Cheryl and Joe sometimes, because Mary's so clearly very religious. I bet Joe doesn't care, and I bet Cheryl probably goes to church for her as well, but maybe little else. Again, this is just headcanon. Cheryl probably doesn't care. Anyway, so they're talking about a film now that was on the night before about tattoos.
Absolutely brilliant.
Now, when I watched this when I was younger, I always thought this was a fake movie, because it just sounded so fantastical. But it being Royle Family, of course, it's a real one. And we'll get to the details of the real thing in a second, but Barbara here is amazing. Denise explains that the woman was kidnapped, drugged, tattooed from head to toe without her consent, and Barbara asks, did she not like it? I'd hate that to happen to me as well, Barbara adds, as if it's a possibility. Just tremendous. Cheryl, though, is just interested in the resolution. What happened in the end, she asks. And we learn that eventually they have sex, the two of them, and he has a tattoo as well, and both of their body tattoos mingle as one. And, Denise, I must say, does a great job here of describing the mad plot. What a surreal image she's conjuring in this muted domestic front. The woman at the close, we learn, then gets revenge by stabbing the guy with a tattoo gun, and there was ink everywhere, we learn. Blood too, I imagine, but ink everywhere. And this show, The Royle Family, this show is so brilliant at ending scenes. So after this, after Denise has relayed the story of Tattoo, after all this genuine craziness, stuff that isn't really discussed on the show, such vivid fantasy and gore, we then crash back into reality with dieting Cheryl, who, having explained the disparity between Blender Stew and a club, asks for another club. Just puncturing this moment, not by asking a follow-up or dwelling like Barbara has on the film, but no, just asking for another biscuit. It hangs for a second then. Barbara eyes her, smiles in a motherly way, puts a ciggy in the tray. I mean, what's she going to do? Refuse her? She knows it's no good for her, but, it's awkward when it's someone else's kid. She can't bat her down like she did Anthony. And Denise doesn't even look up when all this is going on. Just continues to read the catalogue absently. And finally, Barbara then just gets above a chair and heads off to the biscuit tin.
What a thing to happen.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love another club, Barbara.
Then we cut into the living room, and Dave is giving his version of recording events. It's an awesome decision here which adroitly paints the gender divide of interest. Barbara was worried about what happened, found it dreadful. Jim asked if he tattooed the boobs and all. The full Monty, Dave says.
I don't see the point in that. You want to be looking at them, not covering them up.
My point entirely, James.
Anthony nodding enthusiastically to that is hilarious. Like him liking Asti, the young boy acting overly macho to get his point across. It's too real. Barbara then enters, hovers over Nana asking if she's still asleep. Jim states she's got jaw ache. God love her. I mean, you know he doesn't, but great line. Barbara then sits beside Dave, asks how he is, what he's had for his tea. He's stopping for chips on the way home as Denise couldn't be bothered cooking out. And she is pregnant, Barbara reminds him, but Christ, even she knows, surely. Jim rightly says that there's no way of any of us forgetting that she's pregnant, and then talks about the lazy streak running through the family, pondering where it comes from and ironically nodding towards the dozing, angelic Norma. Barbara then brings up the film, and in a way, mimicking the film itself, the two versions of the story of Tattoo commingle themselves here, and Dave goes back into description mode, clearly amazed by the movie. Like, this is clearly one of the best films that Dave has ever seen. Barb listens dutifully, as if she didn't already know, and she says, "Isn't it awful when you weigh it up?" which is just a great phrase. So, Tattoo. What is Tattoo? Well, Tattoo is a 1981 erotic thriller film directed by Bob Brooks, starring Bruce Dern and Maud Adams. I mean, Bruce Dern's in this film. Bruce Dern's an absolute legend. It depicts the relationship between a fashion model and an eccentric tattoo artist that quickly turns sinister. The film had a contentious post-production and pre-release phase. Producer Joseph E. Levine made edits without informing the director, who wrote an angry letter to him, accusing him of prioritising the opinions of assholes in LA. Feminist group Women Against Pornography protested the film for allegedly equating violence with love, and they defaced the advertisement in the subway, which reportedly delighted the producer, who considered it free publicity. Now, what about the reviews? Well, film critic Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times awarded the film 2 out of 4 stars. He wrote that he enjoyed the film's first 2 acts and singled out Dern's performance as very good, but he thought the film faltered in the triteness of its climax. He wrote, quote, "Tattoo could have been an effective and disturbing movie. It opens so promisingly that its crucial scenes are doubly disappointing. Because the film's first hour makes it clear that Tattoo is not intended as just another creepy horror film, the failure of the conclusion is all the more disappointing. The film's depiction of stalking has been compared, of course, to much more successful films like Taxi Driver and Maniac, and funnily enough, in the cultural reception section on Wikipedia of the film, there is a whole paragraph about the royal family and talking about how the film is discussed extensively within the British show. Love that. And when Dave says Tattoo, Jim does an impersonation of Tattoo from Fancy Island. Barbara sweetly asks if he's in the film. I mean, what you've just heard, Barb, and you think he's in the film, the, quote, little dwarfy one. I mean, you've got to love Barb's maternal reasoning sometimes. And Fancy Island being an American fancy drama TV show that aired on ABC from 77 to 84. The series starred Ricardo Montalban as the mysterious Mr. Rourke and Hervé Villechaize, I think I'm saying that right, as his assistant Tattoo. And in it, guests were granted so-called fantasies on the island for a price. The way Dave says no here is amazing as well. Sounds like he's going down a plug hole. That weird way that Dave speaks sometimes, the pitches that he can reach.
What was it called?
Tattoo.
Hey, boss, the plane.
Oh, was he in it? That little dwarfy one?
No.
Cheryl then comes in with Denise, just for a quick look at Nana. Cheryl, ever clueless, asks if that's the eye for the cataract. Jim taps her on the side and then asks if she wants to take Nana to the precinct for a few hours, but she's off to blend some veg for a supper. Everyone says goodbye. Jim calls her Shegsy and compliments her for being a dynamo. She's going Weight Watchers, Jim is told, who is acidic on the response.
Well, she's just joined Weight Watchers.
Weight Watchers, a room full of fat-ass women paying loads of money to be told not to shovel food into their gobs.
The voicing here, Jim saying vegetables. And she seems to be sticking to it, we learn. She's got lots of low-fat spreads, and Mary's even got her own compartment in the fridge. What the freezer, Jim says. I mean, he's really got some of his most precise jabs in on Cheryl over the series. Probably insults her more on average than anyone else. I mean, maybe Norma's in those rankings too, but after the number crunching. From here then, from something quite nasty, we get into a real heartwarming sequence. Everyone sits down. Barbara then encourages the clan to look at Nana sleeping beside her, declaring that she's worn out, to which Jim is dismissive. The camera then goes for an extreme close-up on the nodding Nana. Don't they get more like children when they get older? Barbara says, and, that's a deep statement and oh so true, as anyone knows. Barbara glances at her mother, feels love, clearly, puts a hand on Nana's, taps it affectionately. It's also interesting in the background, on the TV, we can hear the unnamed narrator discussing something about being on the bedside of a beautiful baby and recognising it's not yours or something like that. And in this shot now, the five of them, without Jim, Dave and Ant are watching TV, but there's 3 generations of royal women sitting beside each other from oldest to youngest, right to left. I guess 4 generations of royals if you count the unborn orange.
Stand by the bedside of a beautiful baby and recognise that we have nothing to do.
Funny when you think about it, isn't it? They look after you, then you look after them.
And as if to underscore this bond between them all, it's such a stirring moment, I must say, I love this. Denise reaches over and holds Barbara's hand as she's holding her own mother's. Barbara, however, is a real brilliant daughter to Norma and a wonderful mother to Denise. Denise, less so in the child and grandchild department, all things considered. Jim, though, of course, sees nothing charming or spiriting in this display of familial love and shakes his head again. The camera then cuts to Dave. We can see beside him Barb still has her hand lovingly stroking Nana's. Dave peruses the TV listings, announces that it's now on the box, and starts to set some gormless plan in motion. Jim eyes him, nods his head to continue with it. Dave asks Jim if he fancies coming down the feathers. Jim tries to be a bit too clever here, saying it ain't fair on Barbara. Dave doesn't seem to understand the tact and nous here required, and Jim seems to get a bit undone by this kindness, with Barb really taking it to heart rather than just seeing it as a way to see less of her and get out of the house. Now, I'm never sure how much of this is truly intentional, and if I ever get the chance to speak to Craig Cash, I would love to ask this, but just as Jim appears to make this gesture to Barb, we hear on the TV, it's the little things that make the difference, even if they don't make the headlines. So Jim then widens his eyes towards Dave, and Dave pushes with it. Asks for the last hour. Jim says it's up to Barbara, who says they're having a nice time here, something Denise echoes. He doesn't want to go, Dave learns, and now their plan lies in tatters. All because Jim was so coy about being in the bad books and all. Denise then asks Ant what's up with his face. Well, to be honest, he's probably still pissed off about being publicly mocked earlier. But via this questioning, we learn that Emma is out with a mate at the pictures that night, a lad. Someone from a family that her family has been dead close with for ages. Just a mate. But of course this sets suspicions stirring throughout the household. And Jim then kicks into a song, torn between two lovers, breaking all the rules, he sings. And I don't know this song, so this is a song called Torn Between Two Lovers, written by Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul and Mary and Philip Jarrell. And the song speaks about a love triangle and laments that loving both of you is breaking all the rules, as Jim says. Mary McGregor recorded it at the Muscle Shoals Sound Studio in '76, and the song became the title of her first album. Massive song as well, went to number 1 in Canada, Australia, the US Billboard Hot 100, and in the UK it was number 4, Ireland number 5, so yeah, seemingly a huge song. 1976 as well, definitely something from Jim and Barbara's youth. Dave, as they're all joking, actually reaches across to touch Ant's ears here while singing, which he slaps away. Barbara tries to stamp it out, but Jim keeps it going and Dave takes the rein again, talking about the classic hole in the bottom of the popcorn trick, to which Ant explodes quite rightly back at.
It's just a mate of hers.
Oh, aye. He'll be at cinema with her now with his big box of popcorn on his lap with all cut in bottom, offering her some, if you know what I'm saying.
Or what, Dave, like you do with Beverly Macker?
Man, why does he always have to bring Beverly Macker into it? Just because he's been too timed.
I mean, what can Dave say to that? It's a low blow, and all he can do is grumble in response, with Denise actually snapping back on his behalf, stating that Anthony's been too timed. I mean, it's really nasty. Emma's probably his first proper girlfriend, the first one he really cares about, so it's all a little unneeded, really. People go a little too far. And Jim, again, Jim should be the dad here, the bigger man, cheer up his son, but he doesn't. He, in fact, attacks him, joins in as he's being attacked from all angles. He spells out cleanly, in fact, stating, stick in there, you've got no qualifications or prospects, but you never know. The other fella might be a right loser. It's like, oh, savage. And then Ant's had enough, really. I mean, we're going to see Barbara storm out in the next episode, and here Ant goes before her. leaves the house, straight out the house, slamming the door, off to Darren's. It's tough to see, really, poor Ant. I mean, in the last 20 minutes or so, he's not only had his band torn apart, but also him and Emma's relationship undermined as well. Jim is then rightly put in the dock. The family agree he was being dead tight on him, which, they were all kind of going in that direction, I guess. He asks fairly who was singing the song then, but that was a joke, apparently. I mean, it's a hard line to define, honestly. Jim says he's just being realistic. She's going to dump him eventually. And he'll have wasted all the money on her. If anything, he's doing a favour. I mean, does Jim really believe any of this? Is this just like a further level of the joking? I don't really know. I mean, it's just sad, really, in many respects. And poor Anthony, Denise says. Barbara isn't happy either. Side-eyes Jim, who side-eyes back, but it's soon forgotten, though, as Denise starts to talk to Dave about how he would feel if she went to the pictures with someone else. But he gets ratty here and, in a husband-like fashion, just kind of lays the law down.
You would, though, wouldn't you?
I don't know.
You would.
I don't know, do I? You've not been, have you? And you're not going to do, are you? Bloody hell.
Dave, can't you try and be a bit more possessive?
Can't you try and be a little more possessive? I mean, at least Denise is saying what she wants. Who doesn't want someone to feel possessive over them as well? Who doesn't want to be wanted, I guess? Men are all over you until you marry them, Barbara says. But Dave is just being Dave, and you can't expect him to have such imagination in this round when being asked about these hypothetical scenarios. I mean, Denise should know better. Barbara adjusts her skirt. Dave mentions about Anthony really like Emma, and again, it's kind of exciting, like Emma and Darren, these kind of characters that are kind of in the ether, Jim has now gone on, and everyone who was then ragging on Anthony in the previous minute has now gone onto his side, bar Jim. Jim, though, is a little bit more worried about him getting a bloody job. It's wrong that the only bloody person who works in this house is your mother. Denise, of course, was never expected to work, and Jim was retired then. Barb sort of registers this and kind of moves on. What else can she do? Barbara then lets Jim know about Joe's hospital date. He nods non-committally, and Barbara then says that has broken her dream. Another quaint phrase that I love, and to be honest, I hadn't really heard before this show, but yeah, fairly self-explanatory, reminds Barbara of her dream, and she then fills us in on her reverie. And I must say, along with Tattoo, there is lots of weird images in this episode.
I had a dream that Joe was pulling a caravan all on his own. Oh, Cheryl and Mary were inside, and Joe was pulling it like a big shire horse. Wonder what that means.
It means you're bloody mad. No wonder Joe's going in hospital if he's pulling Cheryl and a man around. Bloody hell, he must be knackered.
Oh, I was looking everywhere for Jim to go and help him.
It's great that Jim brings it all back as well. Barbara's reaction as she's telling this, she bites her front lip, thinking she's a bit mad, I suppose. And what does that mean? Joe up front as the caregiver, toiling silently. And I wonder what he works as, Joe, or if he's retired. I mean, he's slightly older than Jim, but I think he kind of looks a bit older than he is at this point. And why the tractor too? Joe does perhaps have a shire horse feel about him though, silent, trudging on. Barbara says she was looking for Jim in the dream, but she was unable to find him to help. Dream and reality colliding there. Denise is having dreams of Aeros and toffee crisps, she learns. The thing she was craving before in the show. And this opens up people to speak about their own dreams. Denise having dreams of Aeros and toffee crisps, the thing she was craving before in the show. And Jim with a reoccurring dream about strangling an old woman with an eye patch. Barbara tends to her again there and strokes her hand. Dave, we learn, though, is a dead heavy sleeper. Makes a lot of sense. Like old Nana, I guess. I bet he sleeps like a log with nothing in his head. Jim, too, is asleep as soon as he touches the pillow. He'd fall asleep on a washing line, Barbara says. And we have seen Jim kind of half asleep, haven't we, in Another Woman, the 5th episode of the first series. And, he looks like the kind of guy that really, when you wake him, he's bleary-eyed. You know what I mean? He's deep in it, in his REM.
I can't sleep at night, me. He's asleep as soon as his head hits the pillow. He'd fall asleep on a washing line. Do you know, Denise, last night I could hear your Nana snoring in your old room and your dad snoring next to me.
And poor Barb. I mean, even at night we learn she can get no rest, with Jim snoring beside her. I mean, he must be a terribly loud snorer too. and Nana snoring next door in Denise's bedroom. Barbara then tells us about Jim scaring her to death the other night when he sat bolt upright all of a sudden. Wasn't dreaming though, before he left the immersion on, which is cartoonish in its ridiculousness, but really funny. It's odd that we don't cut to Jim here on the reaction, but you know, I like that. Denise then ponders if the baby is sleeping when she sleeps. I mean, lots of sleep chat in this episode. Norma, of course, is still dozing as well and soon to be awake. Jim, though, comes with a hilarious retort here to Denise's wonderings. No, it's more awake than that, love. I mean, zing! Nana then stirs further, mumbling. Everyone looks to her. Barbara seems teeming in anticipation. Dave even nods to her with a certain love in his acknowledgement. Jim clearly isn't charmed, though, and this catalyses him into action, asking Dave if he can bring the van round on Sunday to take her back, as he doesn't like the idea of her travelling on the bus with the eye patch. But Barb then says she'll need to stay another week. Over my dead body, Jim screams in retort, and Barb says that she thinks the world of him, Norma thinks the world of Jim, which, we just know isn't true, right?
Thinks the bloody world of me. Today she had a family-sized bag of bloody Revels. Did she offer me one? Did she shite? She sat on her big fat ass, announcing every one that she put into a big fat gob. Oh, coconut. Oh, orange. Oh, malt bloody teasers.
Oh, is that it then? We can't look after my own mother because she wouldn't share a bag of Revels? Grow up, Jim.
Me grow up? She makes me unbloody plug everything before we go to bed. Then she's got the sod electric blankets on all night.
If it'd been your mum and dad, God rest their souls, I'd have done anything for them.
She should be in a bloody home.
Well, she is in a home. She's in our home, and that's where she's staying, with a family that loves her.
And Revels, I mean, so much confectionery is mentioned in the royal family, right? Revels are a chocolate-coated confectionery with assorted centres made by Mars Inc. They were first introduced into the UK in 1967. Originally, Revels had orange cream, coconut, toffee or peanut centres, along with Galaxy counters, which were minstrels minus exterior shells, and Maltesers. However, the coconut centres were later replaced with coffee cream and the peanuts with raisins. Original Revels flavours also included Turkish Delight, which was withdrawn after 5 years. In July 2008, Revels started a Big Brother-style eviction campaign where only one flavour from the bag would be replaced by a special limited edition flavour. Consumers were asked to nominate on the revelseviction.com website. Voting closed on September 2008, and the flavour attracting the most votes was coffee, which received nearly half the votes cast. Raisin received around 25%, with the remaining votes spread evenly amongst the other flavours. The coffee flavour was replaced with strawberry, but returned in early 2009. And Barb here watches as Jim rants. She's po-faced, unblinking, hitting back with the declaration that, they can't take care of the mother anymore because of not sharing a bag of Revels. I mean, pretty bad though. Again, like turning off the appliances, you are seeing a side of Norma that you don't really get to see on camera, which is intriguing. I mean, these aren't terrible kind of, transgressions against humanity or anything like that, but still they are quite selfish. She could have offered one or two, but, we have seen Jim hiding the pomaine from Cheryl and that in a previous episode, so he's kind of guilty of this as well. And Barbara then gets real, stating if it was any of Jim's parents, God rest their soul, that she would do anything for them. And I really have no doubt that she would have done. I'm sure no one has any doubts about that. She should be in a home, Jim hisses, which, it's like two kids arguing over a child. And throughout this, we can still see Norma somehow still not awake. And, you can imagine if people were talking to her, if people were giving her attention, genuinely, she'd want to be privy to that. Barbara then glares at Jim here before checking back on Norma, and Jim merely picks back up on his Revels scheme.
Ooh, caramel, I think. Oh, no, it's not caramel. Well, it's coffee. I think it's coffee, Jim. Good greedy old cow.
He's seething in his seat here, truly seems angry. And then, after finally stirring for the last time, Norma awakens. Quite convincingly still, she opens her eyes slowly, her neck cocked back before rearing up, and then asking straight away as her opening gambit,
Is it nearly time for the bill?
Hello, Norma. Love you back with us, eh?
I wasn't asleep. I was just resting my eyes.
Of course you were, love.
Yes, the bill. There's quite a few mentions of the bill in this show, isn't there? Something I always remember as being anchored to that 8 p.m. slot, and something that, as I've said before, has a completely undeservingly amazing theme song. The bill's, shout out to the bill, it's fine, but the theme song, Jesus. Jim, of course, is cordial when she's awake, tongue-in-cheek, asking if she's back with them. She wasn't asleep, she says, just resting her eyes. Well, one of them's been resting for a week at least, but, still. Nana then greets Dave and Denise. states that she didn't hear them come along. You know, it's very hard having one eye when you're used to two, but she says she doesn't say anything. You know, she takes her time with it here, plays it up, like a child almost. You know, Barbara was right. Like a child almost, panhandling for sympathy. I mean, Barbara was right in her comparisons earlier. Nana then notices what's on the television. It's Tomorrow's World, something she doesn't watch, which again, like, how are they so spot on here? Because maybe you guys have had these experiences yourself, but I distinctly remember my nan, my Hemel Hempstead nan, we used to stay at hers at the weekends. Obviously, we lived in Birmingham. And, you know, I believe we were over there. This is when I was a young kid. This would have been like the late 90s. And we were watching EastEnders. And she, like, went into the other room because she said, like, I don't watch this at home kind of thing. Like, she wasn't bitter or anything like that. But I think she just kind of, I don't know, she didn't want to watch EastEnders. She just left and went into the other room. And there's a great shot here from Nana's vantage point onto the TV with Tomorrow's World playing as they display a weird squared CD. And this is something that I only noticed doing the notes. I must have watched the episode, you know, many, many times, but only doing the notes that I noticed that, scrutinising it, that as the camera angle is from Nana looking onto the TV, we can see an empty bag of Revels on her lap, which is just fantastic. And Jim explains that, you know, okay, you don't watch it, but you've mostly slept through it. He says that quite wryly. Dave, Denise and Norma kind of look at him there. And Norma then asks Barb if she got her Sennapods, which I've got to be honest, I never really knew what they were, to be honest. So, I mean, you can kind of work out from the following afterwards. But senna being a natural laxative made from the leaves and fruit of the senna plant, and it's used in treating constipation. So, naturally, Barbara got that for Norma. Again, you know, showing how far she'll go for her parent. I'm sure she'll do the same for Jim's as well. God rest their souls. Norma crosses her fingers, turns toward Barbara hopefully. Again, Nana and the toilet are as interwoven thematically as Jim and the bog too. It might be a blockage, she says. Something to do with her eye, maybe. Something that doesn't really make sense, but, you know, internal logic isn't really Nana's strong point. Nana then tells Barbara's story about her doctor being Michael Crawford, and she explodes in laughter at this. And I suppose Michael Crawford, it's kind of a weird reference, isn't it? I don't think anyone, I mean, even at the time I didn't get who this was, but when I realised it was Frank Spencer, you know, okay, duh. But I think he's kind of lost the time on our kind of modern culture. I don't know what you think about that. But I will say, you know, his physical stunts on Some Others Do Have Them is incredible. Like, that's quite a funny show as well. But yeah, Michael Crawford. Let's get into Michael Crawford. Michael Patrick Smith, CBE, known professionally as Michael Crawford, is a British tenor, actor, singer and comedian. He has received international critical acclaim and won numerous awards during his acting career, which has included many film and television performances, as well as stage work on both the West End and Broadway. He perhaps most famously played Frank Spencer in the British sitcom Some Mothers Do Have Them, which first made him a household name, and the title role in the musical The Phantom of the Opera. His acclaimed performance in the latter earning him both an Olivier Award and a Tony Award. And yeah, like I say, that kind of Buster Keaton acting that he does over there, the stunt work on that show is just, I remember seeing that as a kid and kind of having my mind blown slightly. Like, I remember when I was younger and I used to really like Jackie Chan movies and that sort of stuff, and like, Michael Crawford's kind of on that level, you know. Some others really do have him, Christ. So Nana's going mental over this, you know, exploding. Barbara laughs with her and, you know, turns to Dave and Denise as well. And Barbara's more laughing, not at her, but just kind of, you know, taking delight in her mom's delight rather than finding it that funny that he's called Michael Crawford. Because it's not like he's called bloody, you know, Willem Dafoe or something. Oh, Nana wouldn't know who that is. But it's like Michael Crawford is quite a standard name, you know. But I'm sure maybe the Doctor got it a lot. Very famous guy, no doubt. So the show loves to repeat things for comic effect, you know, deriving the comedy out of the mundane, inane nature of it. So Nana then turns to Dave and says the exact same story as if he didn't hear the whole thing. Kind of like how Nana apparently hasn't heard anything going around us, you know. People seem to have thin proximities in the royal family. And I love how the final 5 minutes of this programme are all Nana. She's the entire focus. The camera often cutting to her as Liz Smith gloriously fills the frame. And Nana then shares one of Dr. Crawford's sweet one-liners.
Do you know what he said to me? Even though I'm taking the cataract out of your eye, I'm leaving the twinkle in. Oh, Barbara, hope he has.
A line we discussed that Carolyn Ahern wrote that, well, we learned from the Carmel Morgan interview after her passing. So yeah, Carolyn Ahern classic there. And Nana, you know, she can really turn on a dime. She's asleep for most of the episode. Then she's hysterical with laughter over Michael Crawford. Then sombre. You know, she stops after the cataract anecdote and retreats in herself. Tells Barbara that she hopes he has left it in. Which, of course, you know, it's just an abstract bit of charm, really, what Crawford has said. That he no doubt says to all the old ladies who recognise his name and need the operation. But the mood lowers then. It gets sad. You know, from behind, Nana looks like she's back asleep almost. It's kind of, she can just go there, can't she? It's like, think about with Twiggy on the Sunday dinner episode when she's talking about, you know, being a great grandmother and all that sort of stuff. And then just saying, oh, I hope I'm still alive then. And then it just sours the whole enterprise. She then perks up, however, after this, asking if it's tonight. That thing with the man dressed as a chicken. It is funny, she says. She loves the programme. She gets David, not Dave, David, to check if the programme's on. He brings up the newspaper. I mean, he's already looked over the listings, of course. There's nothing that strikes out that it could be. Denise then surmises that it might be the Chicken Tonight advert, which I recall as well, but it's not that. But she likes that. I mean, what is she speaking about here? Did anyone ever crack what show this was, pun intended? I mean, the RoyleRamblepod@gmail.com. Get in touch with me there if you know about Nana's chicken programme. Norma has got a no for an answer from a few people, but still persists. And Jim, who has been silent, aside from greeting Norma, has been silent for the last 5 minutes, stands up stoutly. Tells Dave to get his coat on. They're out of there. And of course, it isn't over just this incident, but, you know, it's very annoying the way Nana's been. He just can't stand it. You know, this whole week must have been hell for him, and understandably, perhaps. So Jim rises, gets up, and the episode ends kind of how the last episode ended. Well, the last episode, as you recall, was Jim telling Denise to have a piss, and this one, Jim is telling Dave to go. They're both going to go, to get out of the building, you know. And as always, you're just thinking, what happens next? Like, what does Barbara say? How does Norma respond? You know, they probably would prefer like a quieter evening, maybe the three of them. It would be quite nice to see an episode where it's just Barbara, Denise and Norma just chilling for a bit. Like, you know, I'd like to see that sort of trivia. Maybe Anthony in the corner. Anthony returns back for a little bit. But yeah, that brings us to the end of the 4th episode of the 2nd series. Alright, and that about wraps us up. So, as always, if you enjoy the show and you want to give back to the show in some way, there's many ways you can do it for free, of course. You can leave us a review on iTunes, you can subscribe on YouTube, you can tell a friend, you can check us out on Spotify, you can share it, you know, on whatever platforms you are able to. The RoyleRamblepod@gmail.com, please get in touch with me there. If you want to come on for the quiz, if you just want to chat to me, if you want to just correspond in some way, it's always great to hear from you and I'll read them out at the top of the show. And if you want to go a little bit further, if you really dig the Royle Ramble pod and you want to help keep the lights on over here at HQ, then you can go onto Patreon and you can support us over there. And basically that gives you premium access to the show. So it's always a month ahead on the Patreon with the new episode there. So yeah, this has been Tom as always. Go back through the archive, check out all the old episodes. Hope you're having a good December. That's when we're launching this, December 2021. I think it's looking a bit uncertain out there, but you'll always have the Royals to keep you company and I'll be there as well. So yeah, this is Tom, the Royle Ramble pod. Take it easy.